The old rescue barn was silent the night it began, so silent that Mia could hear her own heartbeat echoing inside her ribs. She would later swear that something in that silence felt wrong, as if the air itself was holding its breath. But at that moment, all she knew was that the newest arrival, an emaciated, frightened rescue mare they had named Willow, had gone another day without eating. Another day closer to the edge. Mia had stayed late again, long after the other volunteers left, unable to shake the chill that crawled up her spine whenever she looked into Willow's eyes. They were soft, amber, beautiful, and completely empty. It wasn't the emptiness of fear or pain. Mia had seen that before. No, this was something deeper, something broken, something that made Willow stand as still as stone, staring through the world rather than at it. Mia stepped quietly into the mare's stall, holding a fresh bucket of soaked mash. Steam rose into the cold barn air. Any other horse would have perked up, nostrils flaring, hooves shifting with interest. Willow didn't move, not even a blink. Her ribs pressed sharply beneath the thin drape of her winter coat. Her long black mane fell in tangled sheets over her face. She looked like a creature drifting somewhere far away, trapped behind an invisible wall no one could cross. "Please," Mia whispered, setting the warm mash in front of her. "Just try." But Willow only stared at the opposite wall, breathing slow, shallow breaths, as if she were conserving the little life she had left. The barn's heater clicked off, plunging the building into a deeper cold. Outside, the wind scraped across the snow, howling through seams in the old wooden siding. Mia wrapped her arms around herself and stepped closer to the mare, though something in her chest tightened as she approached. Every instinct told her that Willow wasn't refusing food because she was sick. It was something else, something no one at the rescue could diagnose. The vet had said that physically she should recover, but emotionally, psychologically, she was unreachable. Horses could grieve. Everyone knew that. But Willow looked like she had lost more than a companion. She looked like she had lost her entire reason for being. And then it happened. The moment that would haunt Mia long after. As Mia reached out to stroke Willow's neck, the mare suddenly lifted her head, slowly, mechanically, and turned it toward her for the first time. Their eyes met, and Mia felt the breath leave her lungs. There was a story in those eyes. A terrible, wordless story that rattled something deep inside her. Willow wasn't just grieving. She was waiting. Waiting for something or someone that wasn't coming back. "What happened to you?" Mia breathed. Willow held her gaze for several seconds before lowering her head again, retreating back into whatever heavy darkness she lived inside. Mia stepped out of the stall and leaned her forehead against the cold metal gate. She had never felt so powerless. She wanted to help. She wanted to fix this horse, to coax her back into the world, to prove that kindness still existed. But every attempt failed. Willow ignored food, water, affection, warmth. She wasn't aggressive. She simply withdrew, as if she had severed the last thin thread tying her to life. Mia exhaled shakily and pulled her phone from her pocket, tapping it in a distracted rhythm. She scrolled through her messages, then through her recordings, notes from school, reminders, fragments of old voice memos she hadn't deleted. Her thumb hovered over one labeled field trip, kids at the corral. Something pulled at her, a strange instinct she couldn't explain. She tapped it. Children's laughter crackled through the speaker, followed by the sound of little boots hitting packed dirt and a teacher's voice calling instructions. It was harmless, nostalgic, meaningless, until Willow moved. Mia froze. It was the first sound the mare had reacted to since arriving. Willow's ears flicked, sharp alert. Then her head lifted. She turned her entire body toward Mia's phone, trembling. Slowly, cautiously, Mia raised the volume. The children's voices grew clearer. Laughter, excited squeals, the soft thud of small footsteps running. And then, a single child's voice, bright and sweet, saying, "Come on, girl. You can do it." Willow stumbled forward, her hooves scraping the floor as if her legs suddenly remembered the world. She pressed her chest against the stall gate, eyes wide, nostrils quivering. A low, aching sound rose from her throat, a sound so full of longing it made Mia's skin prickle. "What is it?" Mia whispered, backing up a step in shock. Willow wasn't just listening. She was searching, desperate, hopeful, terrified. The mare pawed at the gate, something wild and frantic overtaking her. She shook her head, snorting, scanning the barn as if expecting someone to appear out of the shadows. Mia fumbled the phone, almost dropping it. She had no idea what she had triggered, but the transformation was overwhelming. This wasn't normal recognition. This was emotional memory, raw, explosive, painful. And then Willow did something that made Mia's blood run cold. She reached her head over the gate, stretching desperately toward the phone, and let out a sound no one in the rescue had ever heard from her, a sharp, heart-shattering whinny, drenched in grief so real that Mia felt tears sting her eyes instantly. It was the cry of a soul who had been waiting for that voice. That exact voice. Mia stood frozen, her breath trembling, as Willow pressed her forehead against the metal, eyes shut tight, body shaking in silent agony. Mia felt the world tilt. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Willow recognized the voice. And not just recognized, she needed it. She had been starving herself, not because she couldn't eat, but because she had lost the one thing that made life meaningful. Mia's hands trembled around the phone. Who was the child in that recording? Why did Willow respond like this? What had happened to her? And what, or who, had she lost? The barn suddenly felt colder, heavier, thick with a sorrow that didn't belong to Mia, but wrapped itself around her anyway. Willow let out another broken whinny, and Mia's breath hitched. She didn't understand the story yet. But in that moment, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This mare wasn't dying from illness. She was dying from heartbreak. And the voice that could save her belonged to a child she didn't know how to find. Mia had always believed that animals understood more than people gave them credit for, but she had never imagined anything like this. Willow's transformation after hearing that recording left her shaken long after she locked the barn for the night. She drove home through the dark mountain roads, barely remembering the trip, replaying the mare's cry again and again in her mind. She had come to the rescue center to learn, to help, to work with horses, not to unravel mysteries that felt bigger than anything she was prepared for. But as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, she knew something inside her had shifted. She couldn't ignore what she'd seen. Willow didn't need medicine or training or coaxing. She needed that voice, that specific child's voice. And now Mia had to figure out who the child was. The next morning, she reached the barn before sunrise. Frost coated the ground in brittle silver, crunching under her boots as she hurried toward Willow's stall. She half feared the mare would be collapsed, half hoped that some miracle had happened overnight. Instead, she found Willow standing rigidly in the same position she had left her, head lowered, eyes dull once more. It was as if the spark Mia had seen had been snuffed out the moment the recording ended. The only sign that last night had been real was the way Willow jerked her head when Mia spoke, expecting perhaps to hear that voice again. But when she didn't, her entire body sagged in resignation. Mia leaned against the stall door, biting her lip. "I don't know who that child is," she whispered, "but I'll find out." She didn't expect Willow to understand, yet the mare blinked once, long and slow, as if acknowledging her promise. Mia took a deep breath. First step, she needed to revisit the recording. She stepped back, opened the memo, and listened closely. Children's laughter whined through the corral fence. A teacher giving instructions. And then the girl's voice, clear, bright, familiar in a strange, uncanny way after hearing Willow react to it. "Come on, girl. You can do it." Mia replayed it at least 20 times, trying to separate the sounds in the background. Maybe she could figure out where it had been recorded. She remembered the day. It had been a volunteer event at a therapy ranch she visited during her early training. The children had been interacting with the therapy horses. But which ranch had it been? She had visited so many during her courses. She didn't recognize the voice of the teacher, and the children had been strangers. Her heart sank. Even if she remembered the ranch, what were the chances she'd find one specific child? But then she thought of Willow's reaction, the trembling, the frantic searching, the broken whinny. This wasn't something she could dismiss. She had to try. Something in her gut told her that the child mattered, that the child was the key to Willow's survival, maybe even to her past. She walked down the barn aisle toward the office where Mark, the rescue center's manager, was sorting paperwork. His graying beard and tired eyes spoke of decades spent saving animals that others had thrown away. He looked up as she stepped inside. "You're here early," he said. "Couldn't sleep?" Mia hesitated. Telling him the truth felt absurd, but she forced herself to try. "Mark, something happened last night with Willow." He raised an eyebrow. "She finally ate?" "No," Mia whispered. But she reacted to something. She explained everything. The voice memo, Willow's sudden outburst, her desperate, heartbreaking cry. Mark listened silently, his expression shifting from skepticism to curiosity to something deeper. When she finished, he folded his hands. "Horses do form deep bonds," he said slowly, "especially mares, especially if they lose a foal or a young rider." "You think she belonged to a child?" Mia asked. "Maybe," he said, "but without records, it's guesswork. All we know is she was found abandoned on a back road. No microchip, no brand we can trace." His eyes softened. "But if she reacted like you say, then that child might be her last connection. And if the mare is shutting down, that might be the only thing that can bring her back." Mia nodded. It was what she felt, even if she didn't want to admit it aloud. "I want to find the girl," she said. "I don't know how, but I want to try." Mark scratched his beard. "We can start by tracking down the therapy ranch from your recording. Bring me the file. We'll boost the sound, isolate the background noise. Might get lucky." Relief washed over her. At least she wasn't alone in this. She handed him the phone, and he plugged it into his computer's audio software. As he increased the gain and filtered out wind noise, faint details emerged. A distant bell, a creaking wooden windmill, the distinctive call of sandhill cranes. "That narrows it down," Mark murmured. "There's only one ranch with wetlands nearby where cranes flock during spring." He wrote down a name on a scrap of paper. River Bend Outreach Ranch. Mia Sip Bal Squeakend. She recognized that name. She'd worked there once, briefly, during her training. But the horses, there were mostly therapy horses for special needs children. Could Willow have been one of them? Mark removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. If she came from there, they might know her story. Or the child's. Mia nearly ran out of the office, adrenaline propelling her forward. She grabbed her coat and keys. "I'll go now." "Wait," Mark called. "Don't get your hopes up. These things are messy. Sometimes people don't want to talk. Sometimes the past is painful." But Mia only nodded. She knew the risks. She knew she might be searching for a ghost. But she also knew that doing nothing meant letting Willow fade away. An hour later, Mia drove down the long dirt road leading to Riverbend Outreach Ranch. The sun rose pale and cold behind the hills, casting a thin golden layer over the frost-covered fields. Memories surfaced as she approached. The smell of hay, the soft murmur of children's voices, the sight of therapy horses standing patiently as tiny hands stroked their muzzles. She parked and stepped out into the chilly morning air. A woman in a thick green jacket approached her with cautious friendliness. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm Mia," she said nervously. "I volunteered here a while ago. I'm looking for information about a horse." "I'm Mare." The woman studied her carefully. "I'm Mare. We've had many." "What's her name?" "We call her Willow," Mia said. "But she might have had a different name." Something flickered across the woman's face. Recognition, then sorrow. "Mia Sibretich." "You know her." The woman exhaled slowly. "If you're talking about the mare I think you are, then you've walked into a tragedy. Her voice dropped, and if she reacted to a child's voice, then you're about to learn why. Mia felt the ground tilt beneath her as the woman's expression shifted into something heavy enough to make the cold morning air feel even colder. The woman, whose name tag read Karen, gestured for Mia to follow her toward the main barn. Her boots crunched over the frost, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. Riverbend Outreach Ranch had always been a bright place in Mia's memory, full of laughter, gentle horses, and the quiet magic that happened whenever a scared child met the right animal. But now, as she stepped inside the dim barn, she felt a ghostly weight in the air. The stalls stood empty, most of the horses already turned out to pasture, but something else lingered, an echo of past voices, whispers of old heartbreaks, traces of a pain that refused to leave. Karen leaned against a stall door and crossed her arms tightly, as if bracing herself before opening a wound that had never quite healed. "Before I tell you anything," she said softly, "I need to know what happened to her." To the mare. Mia swallowed hard. "She's alive, but barely. She won't eat, won't respond to anything until I played a voice recording." She reacted to a child's voice. Desperately. Karen closed her eyes. Then it is her. A cold silence settled between them. "Mia esse pas stadid." "Please," she whispered, "tell me what happened." Karen took a deep breath, and her voice grew brittle, fragile. The mare wasn't always like this. The kids used to call her Juniper. She was one of our best therapy horses, gentle, patient, incredibly intuitive. But she bonded with one child more deeply than any other. A little girl named Lily. Lily was special, soft-spoken, timid, afraid of almost everything. Karen's eyes glistened, but she wasn't afraid of Juniper. From the moment they met, it was as if the horse wrapped herself around that child's fragile world. Like she knew the girl needed protection. Mia felt her breath catch. A child, a horse, a bond so deep it carved itself into the soul. And something terrible must have shattered it. Karen continued, her voice trembling. Lily had a condition, a rare heart defect. Her parents brought her here to build confidence, to give her something joyful in her short, difficult days. She wiped a tear quickly with the edge of her sleeve. She adored Juniper. She brushed her, hugged her, whispered secrets into her mane. The mare followed her around the arena like a loyal shadow. No matter how frightened Lily was of the world, she was brave with Juniper. Karen paused, pressing her lips together. And then it happened. Mia braced herself. Karen's voice dimmed to almost a whisper. Lily collapsed during a session, right beside Juniper. One moment she was laughing, encouraging the mare. The next, she was on the ground. She inhaled sharply. Her heart gave out before anyone could reach her. The barn felt suddenly too small, as if the walls themselves grieved. Mia pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the echo of someone else's devastation. Karen continued, each word heavy with memory. Juniper tried to lift her. She kept nudging her, pawing at the ground, crying for her to get up. We had to lead her away, but she fought us. For hours after Lily was taken to the hospital, Juniper whinnied nonstop, searching, begging, refusing to understand. Mia blinked back tears that blurred her vision. Willow, Juniper, wasn't just grieving. She had lost her heart, her purpose, the one soul who made her world feel safe. Karen wrapped her arms around herself. When Lily died later that night, everything changed. Juniper shut down instantly. She stopped eating, stopped responding. She'd stand in the corner of her stall, facing the wall, as if the rest of the world no longer existed. Karen shook her head. We tried everything, vets, specialized trainers, therapists, but nothing reached her. It was as if the moment the little girl's voice disappeared, Juniper chose to disappear too. The image sliced into Mia, those amber eyes filled with nothingness, that stillness too deep to be natural, that silent, suffocating grief. She finally understood what she had seen in Willow's stall. Karen exhaled shakily. Eventually, she hurt herself trying to escape the ranch. She broke down fences, ran through fields, searching for Lily. We couldn't keep her safe unless we can find her, and she only deteriorated faster. Her voice thickened. Her parents, Lily's parents, couldn't bear to see Juniper that way. They asked us to rehome her somewhere far away. They believed it was kinder, that maybe she'd forget. Karen's voice broke. But horses don't forget the ones they love. Mia felt tears slip down her cheeks. She didn't forget, she whispered. Not even for a moment. Karen looked at her with a sorrow that was almost unbearable to witness. You said she reacted to the recording. The voice was at Lily. Mia nodded slowly. It must have been. I had recorded a class field trip when I was volunteering here. I didn't know she was in it. She said, "Come on, girl. You can do it." And when Juniper, Willow, heard it, her entire world came back to life. For a moment, Karen turned away, wiping her eyes. I thought moving her away would help, but it seems all it did was break her heart twice. Mia's voice shook. Was there anyone else? Anyone who sounded like Lily? Any family? Friends? Karen hesitated, a shadow flickering across her expression. Lily had a twin brother, she said softly. A boy named Jacob. Mia esse breticht. A twin. A voice that might be similar, familiar, comforting. A voice Willow might accept when she could no longer hear Lily's. Where is he? Mia asked quietly. Karen hesitated longer this time. After Lily died, Jacob stopped speaking. Completely. Trauma can do that to a child. He hasn't said a word in almost a year. His parents pulled him from programs, therapy, everything. They were drowning in grief. All of them. Mia's heart twisted painfully. Do you know how to contact them? Karen nodded. Ido. But Mia. She stepped closer, gripping Mia's arm gently, urgently. If you bring that boy back into the mare's life, and something goes wrong, you could reopen wounds that nearly destroyed that family. Mia held her gaze with quiet determination. He's hurting. She's dying. They're the last pieces of each other's world. Maybe bringing them together isn't reopening a wound. Maybe it's helping it finally heal. Karen studied her for several long seconds before finally nodding. I'll give you their address. But be gentle. They've lost so much. Mia took the slip of paper with trembling fingers. She felt the weight of everything that had led her to this moment. The broken mare, the lost child, the silent twin, the ache woven through every thread of this story. As she stepped out of the barn into the cold morning light, she realized her breath was shaking not from fear, but from purpose. She wasn't just searching for answers anymore. She was searching for a way to save a soul that had been waiting in the dark far too long. And somewhere in a quiet house, a little boy who had forgotten how to speak might be waiting too, without even knowing it, for the one creature who could call him back to life. The moment hung, suspended in the air, as if the entire barn were holding its breath. Dust motes drifted lazily through the slanted beams of afternoon light, swaying like tiny lanterns in the quiet. Mia stood completely still, one hand resting on the soft wool collar of her jacket, the other clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. A few steps away, the boy stood as rigid as a carved figure, his small shoulders hunched inside an oversized gray hoodie that swallowed his frame. His eyes stayed lowered, fixed on the sawdust-covered ground as though every grain of it weighed more than he could carry. And behind him, enormous and unmoving, Juniper stood in her stall like a quiet monument, her breath slow and deep, her dark coat shimmering with the fading glow of the day. She hadn't taken her eyes off the boy since they'd walked in. She seemed to be waiting too, though for what none of them yet understood. The stall smelled faintly of old hay, cedar shavings, and the comforting earthy scent that only horses carry. It was normally calming, a place where Mia felt she could breathe. But right now her heartbeat thumped in her ears. She whispered the boy's name softly, hoping to coax him closer, but he didn't respond. He rarely did. His silence wasn't empty. It was a hardened shell built over months of fear and withdrawal, a silence that had roots. Still, the way he remained angled toward Juniper, however subtly, gave Mia the smallest hint of promise. She learned to look for microscopic changes in children like him. A turn of the chin, the widening of an eye, the minutes where they didn't shrink away. Any tiny difference could be a beginning. But Juniper hadn't moved either. The mare's ears flicked once toward the boy, then back toward Mia as if she were waiting for permission. She wasn't the same horse she had once been. Trauma had carved its own map into her bones. Her eyes had gained shadows that hadn't been there before. She had once been lively, intuitive, spirited enough to make anyone feel seen, but the day she had lost her previous owner, the only person she had truly bonded with, something inside her had dimmed. Since then, she'd refused food, refused touch, refused every attempt at connection. Except this time, right now, she wasn't refusing. She was watching. Watching the boy with a strange, still intensity that made the hairs on Mia's arms rise. The quiet stretched, taut as an invisible string. Mia slowly lifted her phone, her breath trembling as she unlocked it. The old recording she had been given weeks ago by the late owner's daughter sat waiting in her music folder, a simple voice note. She had never played it. She had been afraid it would shatter Juniper completely. But the mare's behavior during the past days had become impossible to ignore. She had begun to turn her head at the faintest familiar sound. She had begun pacing the stall at night, placing her head over the gate, as though searching for someone long gone. Something inside her had remembered. Something inside her still waited. Now that same something flickered in the mare's eyes. She lifted her head slowly, nostrils flaring, her front hoof shifting ever so slightly. Mia felt her throat tighten. She glanced at the boy, whose fingers were clasped in a small fist around the frayed cuffs of his hoodie. His breathing was shallow, but his face had lifted just a little, enough that she could see the soft curve of his cheek. He was listening too, despite looking at the ground. The whole moment balanced on the edge of a decision. With a trembling thumb, Mia tapped play. The barn filled with a soft crackle, like an old radio warming up. Then a voice emerged, warm, gentle, unmistakably familiar to Juniper. A man's voice, steady and calm, carrying the soft drawl of someone who had loved wide, open spaces and quiet mornings. He spoke only a few simple words, recorded casually one evening as if it had meant nothing at the time. "Hey girl, easy now. I'm right here." There was a shuffle, a faint laugh, the rustle of hay under boots, and then a soft whistle. A tune Juniper had responded to every day of her life before everything fell apart. The transformation was immediate. Juniper's entire body jolted. Her head rose high, ears pinned forward in a desperate, searching gesture. Her tail flicked, her hooves shifting rapidly beneath her, as though her legs suddenly remembered what hope felt like. Her nostrils flared again, this time with urgency, inhaling the air as though she expected the voice to walk into the barn at any second. Her eyes widened, shining with an intensity that caught Mia completely off guard. The boy felt it too. He lifted his head sharply, more sharply than Mia had ever seen him move, his dark eyes blinking up at the mare with raw confusion. Something in the sound, the warmth of the man's voice, the quiet whistle, struck through his stillness. His mouth parted, breath catching in his chest. He didn't step forward, but he no longer stood anchored to the ground either. His weight shifted, ever so subtly, as if the pull of Juniper's reaction tugged at him like an invisible thread. Juniper let out a low sound, a soft, trembling nicker that broke like a crack in thick ice. It wasn't loud, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. Her whole body leaned over the stall door as though she were reaching through it, searching for the man who could no longer return. The sound tore through the silence, filling the barn with a mournful longing that made Mia's eyes sting with tears. She had never heard the mare make a sound like that since the day she lost him. It wasn't just grief. It was recognition. It was memory. It was love colliding with loss all over again. The boy's breathing quickened. His gaze stayed locked on Juniper, as though seeing her in that moment unlocked something buried deep inside him. His small hand twitched at his side, inching forward without him realizing. The recording continued softly, the man humming a simple melody between words. It wasn't a song with lyrics. It was just the kind of tune someone hums when the world feels peaceful, when the moment is enough. The kind of tune that becomes a lifeline without anyone noticing. Juniper stepped closer, pressing her forehead gently against the gate, her breath warm and uneven. She didn't look at Mia. She didn't look at the empty air where the voice should have been. She looked at the boy, drawing a connection between the familiar sound and the fragile human standing before her. The grief in her eyes softened, replaced by something gentler, something ancient and instinctive, recognition of pain. Horses had a way of sensing brokenness, of seeing through the layers of silence a person could build. And Juniper, carrying her own wounds, recognized his. The boy took a step. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was a step. His sneakers scraped quietly against the stall floor. Mia felt the breath leave her chest in a sharp, trembling release. She didn't dare move, afraid that the slightest sound might break the fragile magic forming between them. Juniper lowered her head slowly, tenderly, as if inviting him to come closer. Her breath puffed softly against the wood, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the boy's quickening heartbeat. Another step, then another. He moved like someone waking from a long, cold sleep, stiff, uncertain, but driven by something he couldn't name. His eyes never left Juniper's. The recording kept playing, the man's gentle voice creating a bridge made not of words but of memory, the kind that lingers long after a person is gone. When the boy reached the gate, he lifted a trembling hand. He didn't touch her. He hesitated, hovering in the air inches from her muzzle. Juniper closed the distance herself, pressing her velvety nose against his palm with the softest, most intentional touch imaginable. The boy froze, his breath caught in his throat in a tiny, broken gasp. Then his fingers curled gently into her fur. His head lowered until his forehead nearly rested against her muzzle, their breaths mingling, two wounded souls recognizing each other in the kind of silence that needs no words. Mia covered her mouth with her hand, trying to steady herself. The recording faded into its final seconds. Another soft hum, another quiet scrape of boots, and then silence. But the bond it awakened didn't fade with it. It deepened. The boy's small hand remained pressed against Juniper's face, and Juniper closed her eyes as though offering him everything left in her heart. This wasn't progress. It was a breakthrough, a shattering, a healing, something neither of them had experienced since the moment their worlds had collapsed. And in that barn, with dust floating like tiny stars and the ghost of a familiar voice still echoing in the wood, a connection was forged that neither time nor loss could undo. The barn held its breath for a long, trembling moment after the recording ended, as if the very rafters were afraid to disturb what had just been born. Sunlight slanted through the high windows in slow, golden rivers, catching on motes of dust and hay chaff until the air itself looked like liquid amber. Juniper's velvet muzzle still rested against the boy's small, trembling palm. Neither moved. The boy's eyes, wide and dark and impossibly old for a child of 9, shimmered with tears he hadn't let fall in almost a year. Juniper's lashes were wet too. A single tear had slid from the corner of her eye and hung, trembling, on the fine hairs of her cheek before it dropped silently to the sawdust below. Mia stood frozen a few paces back, her own tears sliding unchecked down her face. She had expected something, hope, maybe a flicker of life, but not this. Not this sudden, wordless communion that felt older than language, deeper than grief itself. It was as though the mare and the boy had recognized the same hollow place inside one each other, and, in that recognition, had quietly decided to fill it together. The boy's lips parted. No sound came at first, only the softest exhale, like wind moving through dry grass. Then, so quietly that Mia almost believed she had imagined it, he whispered a single syllable. June! Juniper's entire body shuddered. A low, rolling nicker rose from the depths of her chest. Not the desperate cry of a horse searching for someone lost, but something softer, steadier, like a lullaby remembered after nightmare. She pressed her forehead gently, deliberately, against the boy's chest, right over his heart, as though she were listening to it beat and finding it match the rhythm she had carried inside her own for months. The boy's knees buckled. He sank slowly, slowly, until he was kneeling in the straw, arms sliding around the mare's neck. His fingers buried themselves in her tangled black mane, clutching as if she were the only solid thing left in a world that had dissolved into water. Juniper folded her neck around him in return, curving her great warm body protectively, shielding him from the cold that had lived inside both of them for so long. Their breathing synced. Inhale, exhale, inhale, until there was no telling whose ribs rose and whose fell. Mia's hand flew to her mouth to muffle the sob that tore free. She had seen horses comfort children before. She had seen therapy sessions that brought tears to every adult in the arena. But this was different. This was private, sacred. Two souls who had lost the same person, who had carried the same unbearable silence, suddenly discovering they no longer had to carry it alone. Minutes passed, or hours, Mia no longer knew. Time had folded itself gently around them and refused to move. The boy's shoulders began to shake. At first, Mia thought he was cold, but then the sound came, small, broken, the first real tears he had allowed since the funeral. They soaked into Juniper's mane, darkening the black strands, and the mare only held him tighter, her own eyes closed, lashes beaded with moisture. She made no move to step away, no restless shifting of weight. She simply stood, a living pillar, letting the child cry every unshed tear he had swallowed for 347 days. When the storm inside him finally quieted to soft hiccups, the boy pulled back just far enough to look up into her face. His cheeks were blotched red, his eyes swollen, but something in them had changed. The terrible emptiness that had lived there since his sister died had cracked open, and in the fracture light was pouring in. He placed both palms on either side of Juniper's face, the way his sister used to do, thumbs stroking the white star between her eyes. Then, so faintly it was barely more than breath, he spoke again. I missed you. Juniper answered with a sound Mia had never heard from her before, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through her whole body and into the boy's hands, as if the mare were saying, I never left you. I was waiting. The boy's face crumpled again, but this time with something that looked almost like relief. He pressed his forehead to hers and stayed there, breathing her in, warm horse smell, sweet hay, the faint trace of winter air still clinging to her coat. Juniper's ears flicked forward and back, drinking in the sound of his voice like water after drought. Eventually, so gradually it was almost imperceptible, the boy stood. His legs shook, but Juniper shifted her weight to steady him, letting him lean against her shoulder. He reached for the latch on the stall door with trembling fingers. Mia stepped forward instinctively, afraid the mare might panic. But Juniper only watched him with calm, ancient patience. The latch clicked. The door swung open. For a heartbeat, the boy hesitated on the threshold, as though crossing it meant stepping into a world that might still hurt him. Then Juniper lowered her head and nudged him gently in the center of his chest. Once, twice, until he stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft, final snick. They stood together in the half-light of the stall, horse and child, wrapped in a silence that no longer felt heavy. The boy ran his hands slowly down her neck, over the sharp ridge of her withers, across the hollows where ribs still showed too clearly. His touch was reverent, exploratory, as though he were memorizing her all over again. When his palm reached the place just behind her elbow, he paused. Juniper turned her head and rested her chin on his shoulder, an old, familiar gesture that had once been their private signal for trust. The boy's arm slid around her neck again, and this time when he spoke, his voice was stronger, raw but steady. "She told me to take care of you," he whispered into her mane. "Lily did. The night before she went to the hospital. She said, 'Promise me you'll love Junebug when I can't.'" Juniper's ears flicked at the nickname only Lily had ever used. A tremor ran through her great frame, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned harder into the boy, giving him her weight, letting him hold her up the way she was holding him. "I'm sorry I forgot," he choked. "I'm sorry I stopped coming. I was scared. I thought if I came back it would hurt more. But it hurt more not coming." Juniper nickered softly, the sound muffled against his hoodie. Forgiveness without words. Love without condition. Outside the stall, Mia sank slowly to the straw-covered floor, knees giving out beneath her. She cried silently, shoulders shaking, grateful beyond measure that she had been allowed to witness this. The barn around them seemed to glow with something gentle and golden, as though the very light had decided to stay a little longer. Later, much later, when the sun had dipped low and painted the world in rose and violet, the boy led Juniper out of her stall for the first time in months. She walked beside him without a halter, without a lead rope, her head lowered to his shoulder, matching his careful, wondering steps. They moved down the aisle like two survivors who had crossed an ocean of grief and found, on the other side, that the shore was still there. Mia followed at a distance, giving them the space they had earned. When they stepped into the small outdoor arena, the last rays of sunlight caught on Juniper's coat and turned it to molten copper. The boy stopped in the center, turned to the mare, and placed both hands on her cheeks again. "I'm not going anywhere," he told her, voice steady now, the voice of a child who had remembered how to be brave. "Not ever again." Juniper lowered her head until her forehead rested against his, and for a long moment they simply breathed together. Horse and boy, grief and healing, past and future braided so tightly they could never be pulled apart. That night, for the first time since she had arrived at the rescue, Juniper ate every flake of hay in her manger. She drank deeply from the water bucket, and when the boy curled up in the corner of her stall on a pile of fresh straw, too exhausted to go home, she stood over him like a guardian, one foreleg cocked, head lowered, watching him sleep. Mia sat outside the stall until the stars came out, tears drying on her cheeks, a quiet certainty settling in her chest. Some bonds, she understood now, are forged in fire and tempered in loss. And when they find each other again, they are stronger than death itself. In the years that followed, people would talk about the silent boy who began to speak again, sentence by sentence, always first to the mare who had waited for him. They would talk about the broken horse who regained her weight, her shine, her gentle, steady heart, because a child had kept a promise his sister never got to finish. But those who were there that first afternoon would never find words big enough for what they had witnessed. Two shattered souls recognizing the missing piece of themselves in the other, and choosing, quietly and without ceremony, to become whole together. And in the soft hush of every evening thereafter, when the boy brushed Juniper beneath the barn lights and whispered goodnight, the mare would rest her head on his shoulder the way she once had for a little girl who could no longer be there, and the circle, broken by death, would close gently, perfectly, in love that had simply refused to end.